Welcome to our Thirsty Book Launch series. I'm Shelley Smith, and today I'm excited to share a conversation with someone whose work perfectly demonstrates the principles that we've been exploring through our discussions about cultural hydration in the workplace. Jon Mayo, he's a strategic advisor and author of multiple leadership books, including Be Relentless and Strive. He's also a former Army captain who now helps visionary founders build movements, not just businesses. What makes Jon's perspective particularly valuable is his unique combination of that military precision coupled with that entrepreneurial agility. He's seen both that high-structured environment and the rapid scaling of organizations, so he really does understand what it takes to maintain the strong relationships and the communication under pressure. You know, his strategic advisory work, Jon's experienced firsthand those challenges that we've been discussing throughout the Thirsty Book Launch series. Three things: how organizational chaos and fear can absolutely be expensive. Secondly, how teams can become very much misaligned. And then third, and yet most importantly, how the right approach in relationships and communication can absolutely transform everything. I want to bring Jon to the voice in this conversation that we've been having because I do believe his real-world experience really validates exactly why the principles of Thirsty matter with so much of what's happening in today's leadership. So with that, I welcome Jon officially. Let's dive in, and feel free to add anything I might have missed.
Oh my, oh my. Well, thank you for the glowing intro. I'm blown away and very excited to jump into this conversation with you.
Excellent. Well, we've got a lot of questions that we want to talk about, or a conversation, I should say. But let's dive in and see where the conversation takes us. The first one up is, I want to bring up your website. You
Okay.
mentioned there, you quote unquote, if a leader feels stuck, misaligned, or stretched too thin, can you kind of paint a picture for me of what that means to you and kind of walk through the type of leadership team meeting and a team that is kind of in that state of mind or that lost in that state of mind? What do you notice when you're sitting there? Kind of what's bubbling up, and what are you asking and saying to them out of curiosity when they feel stuck and misaligned or stretched too thin?
Yeah, absolutely. So I start with typically the primary leader, whether that be the CEO or founder. The relationship truly starts there, or someone who has enough authority to truly drive change in the organization. But it starts with the individual before we enter a team environment. And the indicators that you're seeing, and I can speak to the meeting as well as the individual conversations. But the indicators that you're seeing are just the stress and the pressure of going a million miles an hour, in which our success is become our master. The the higher we climb, the more we're doing, the less control we have over ourselves if we're not exercising extraordinary intentionality in how we're engaging with the work in front of us. So a lot of those indicators show up in verbal cues such as just don't have enough time, or we have to do this now. I can't even think about that. Or a lot of pointing the finger, right? Like this team won't do this, or this department won't do that, right? I'm trying to push this. All of those things show me someone who's in an extremely reactionary state where they are not even thinking about the fires that they're fighting. They're just being pulled apart in 100 directions. And that's kind of music to my ears as far as what I can see us being able to help begin to transform very rapidly.
I love that. It definitely reminds me of, you hear people say there's communication, the lack of communication is terrible around here, and that breakdown that enters into the silos. And it's the very thing that I talk about with the dry mouth syndrome, that dehydration inside of a culture because of the silos that it creates and the deficit that it begins to people walk through, and it almost becomes a norm.
Hmm.
With that, I'm curious with the second, and this is kind of a follow on. You also talk about, and I've heard you say this a few times and in writing, that chaos is expensive and
Hmm.
fear costs even more. And every conversation or LinkedIn post that I've seen you mention that, I love it. So tell me more about that when you think about the actual dollars that the chaos and the fear is ensuing.
Yes. And I think finishing the answer to the first question actually sets us up to answer the second really beautifully, or explore it, I should say. So those are some of the indicators you get in those one-on-one interactions that I mentioned a moment ago. When you're in a team meeting, what I see the two primary indicators that we are dehydrated and have a significant issue and that chaos is reigning supreme is questions are met with silence or return questions to try and pass the buck back to the questioner,
Mhm.
or there's accusations and a lot of defensiveness. The more CYA, the less trust and hydrated that organization is going to be able to move as an integrated whole. And those are all factors now, communally and individually, of the chaos that we're speaking of. And how expensive is it? It can be 10 to 20% of your annual revenue easily. And it can mean the difference between bankruptcy. I was working with one company specifically 60 to 90 days ago, and they were losing $1.2 million a year because of the frantic method in which they were engaging in things and the ineffectiveness in which they were communicating, because it had fallen prey to that CYA first, right? Cover yourself, defensiveness, instead of having the ability to communicate candidly and constructively to an end. And that's just one instance. So it can, and they were only a 8-figure company. So that was a significant amount for them to be losing. And when you're looking at larger organizations, it's interesting because those numbers are typically much larger and surprisingly better hidden because they have more area to hide it. So yeah, that's how I'd at least start the exploration with you on that one.
Well, to your point, I call that the sandstorm of all things, leaking the water out. I want to go back to the example you gave, the 1.5 million on the loss. Can I assume, or if I want to clarify, is that because of systems, processes, and turnover, or was that turnover alone? Because I know turnover alone, depending on what you read, it's anywhere from 10 to 20,000 at a little drop per
Mhm.
person, even entry level. So can you further clarify that?
For them, it was a combination of the three specifically. Which, thank goodness, because if that was just turnover, they would already be bankrupt.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
Yeah, it was a holistic solution for them. But the problem and the reason that turnover is so expensive is because it's an indicator of the broken processes that are not serving the organization to win in the first place. And the lack and betrayal of trust oftentimes that cause people to want to move to a healthier psychological place because they don't want to grow sick where they work. And more and more, there's no need to. It really puts the onus, I think, on leadership to change the reflection that is their organization into a place people want to be at. And by that, I don't mean, just doing crazy amounts of bending over backwards with fun rah-rah stuff. I mean, functionally proficient, but through radical candor and healthy communication. So it's not like, okay, now we have to put in a game room? No, we don't have to ever talk about that unless that becomes something that's enjoyable or something that we want. What I'm talking
yeah.
about is the fact that no one will take ownership of a simple problem. And we spend an hour talking about something that's wasteful, and that hour cost us 15K because of who's in the room. And we didn't move the needle forward. So how about
We
that?
can talk about it again next week and next month too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Your point, and then it grows. Something else that you said that I want to pull the string at is you talked about something around the bigger the company, the more, the crevices, the places to hide. I absolutely see that to be true, Al. And it's always interesting. And I want to hear your take on this. Usually the small companies, the ones that are getting started that are in the, below the 8-figure, think that, oh my gosh, we're just in startup phase and we need processes, we need this and we need this. And the reality is they're usually far more profitable than the really big companies because of the hidden, because we're not looking, because we've got layers. And so I'm curious to your additional thoughts on that with just in the company size of what you've seen.
Yeah, it's the tip of the iceberg. When you're talking about $250 million company, they don't even blink an eye at what's lost, and they don't even realize what the loss is attributed to when you're talking about 1, 5, even $10 million just disappearing. And it's
Mhm.
because it's buried in the noise, and there's less of an urgency for survival unless things are truly on fire. So all it just gets dispersed and spread, and it's death by a thousand cuts. But typically what I find is if any indicator demonstrates a significant loss in one point, that's the tip of an iceberg. And if we pull on the thread with questions of that tip, we begin to see a significant cash flow problem that is
Mhm.
oftentimes completely under the nose of folks and they have no idea, or they may suspect, but didn't realize how truly terrible it is. And that can create some pale faced conversations, but that's the start to moving forward. So
Yeah, agree. All right. this is a continuation as well because everything to me, it's you didn't say this, but you indicated it's what are they learning? Once you pull at the string, once they're all of a sudden, oh, once the face goes pale, what happens then becomes the resilient factor. So, out of curiosity, because your bio mentions this as well, is fostering resilient cultures. And if I drop two different companies in front of you right now, one of them had a resilient culture and one of them was more on the fragile side. What are some things that you noticed just within the first few minutes, few seconds, first hour out of curiosity that gives you that signal?
Oh boy. Aside from just the energy being completely different, let's pretend we're in a leadership meeting, right? The flow of information in a resilient culture is going to have energy to it. It's going to be really candid and kinetic. Folks are going to be speaking their mind with intention, right? Not just beating each other up. There's no elephants in the room. There's not going to be any eggshells to be walked on because everyone's already unified by the belief that if we shoot straight and get to it, there's nothing we can't solve as a team. The difference is the silence is deafening when you're in a non-resilient culture and the words that are spoken are painful. If it's a really unhealthy one, you can just feel people bracing for impact, the defensiveness, the concern of how they can shift it while it's not my department, whatever the case may be. And it can be brutal, night and day difference. So
Even to your point, the body language, I always find it more telling what people don't say versus, what they do say. Okay, so part two of that is you've noticed the two differences. What are you saying out of curiosity? You've been brought in and you're noticing this. What are you saying to those two groups? The one that is, let's just call them on the hydrated state of resiliency, dehydrated. What are you saying to them out loud out of curiosity?
assuming that the relationship is somewhat developed, right? It's not the first conversation. Let's pretend we get through the full first meeting. If it's hydrated, at the end before the team leaves, I'll acknowledge it for everyone and just say, "Hey guys, like it is crystal clear to me that most of us here are very comfortable engaging in uncomfortable topics because there's a shared trust. Am I misreading that?" And the other thing is, I don't assume nor have expectations of solutions for anyone when I enter the room. I
Mm.
always am going in as a avid student of life, looking to learn what is this organization, this group, these humans need, and how can I be a conduit to that? So and even in that acknowledgement of, that hydrated, healthy culture, I'm confirming that I'm not misreading it. And if everyone suddenly shifts back and gets still, I realize I may have picked up the wrong cues. So that's that indicator. And the negative one, I'll ask a different question and I won't hold everyone to the fire too much. But I'll say, hey, my observation is just about everyone here is extremely uncomfortable talking about the problems that we've had. And there seems to be a fair amount of pointing the finger and defensiveness. Does that ring true? And regardless of what's said or not, you can feel the pen drops if it is an unhealthy environment where people feel that way. And once the room clears, the senior leaders I'm sitting down with, that's when we have a pretty brutally candid conversation. But I'll first ask, like, "Hey, do you guys want the genuine, honest assessment of what I've been brought in here to do?" And they'll be like, "Yeah, sure." And we're off to the races because ultimately you have to change the reflection of who you are if you want to see your organization change. And in 1 hour conversation, you have a good idea of what foundation you're working with.
Yeah. I love that. I love in both scenarios, I think I heard you say, da 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 da, does that ring clear? Or
Mhm.
if that rings clear with you. And I love the way of being direct, but yet asking permission of stating what it is that you saw. So I love that. It reminds me, I call it the flowing river on the positive side versus the dust bowl on the negative side. So, the syndrome cause of that. All right, next question. As a former Army captain, you knew that in the military, the trust could be literally life or death. What was the moment in your civilian, though, life on the consultancy side when you realized that business leaders didn't really understand that and they didn't understand that trust can be a mission critical point for them in many ways? So, anything coming to mind there?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So earlier we were talking about the cost of chaos and fear. And the something that I'm seeing happen even more and more since 2020 is silent. departures of organizations. And the lack of trust can quite literally mean the difference of having a business that's still functioning in 3 years versus calling bankruptcy. And it all boils down into people that you're losing and processes that are ineffective and the slow compounding effect of those negative impacts because you've not cultivated trust. Trust also is a lubricant that allows for more efficient and effective movement because people are more willing to try things that are uncomfortable and may not make immediate sense when there's a goodwill foundation. So you may get yes men and women who nod their heads and go and barely check the block and ignore it in an unhealthy organization because they don't want to get in trouble or immediately lose their job while they're looking for a job elsewhere in an unhealthy one, and your business is done. It essentially has a severe form of cancer. So I think that acutely, it's when the leader, like, once again, thinking from that founder or CEO level, lacks the self-awareness to understand that the manner in which they behave and the effect of their actions and words are causing people to look to flee or to die inside in place. And the difference is quite literally their tenure there and or the company's survival.
What do you think? And obviously, you can disagree with this, but it makes me think about the difference in the military side. I perceive it to be built in, that communication, that connection, that core, this is how we do what we do, the non negotiable. But on the civilian side, we're always finding ourselves having to create what that structure is. Does that question make, or it's not really a question, it's a comment. Does that, you agree? Do you agree? I have not been on both sides, and you have. And I just feel like one is built in and one needs to be created. I'm curious if you have thoughts on that.
I think that both need curated. And I do think that the military has invested a significant amount of time and money to increasing the usability of the scaffolding for folks, like for that type of structure and communication. However, similar to any other industry, there is a wide spectrum of performance, both in individuals and teams. And some of the most dysfunctional teams I've ever seen in my life are in the military. It's like, how are we alive? So
Funny,
it,
not fun.
I do think both are there. What's interesting is there's no easy button on that side. If you don't earn trust, if you don't demonstrate competency, you will be irrelevant. It's a little bit slower moving in replacement of personnel. And that's the primary difference on the military side. On the civilian side, we can be far more agile and aggressive. One of my favorite words, being agile, but we can be far more responsive with intention to who's in what seats and how is it that we're operating. And that freedom allows us to correct course much more swiftly. On the other end, it's enough rope that we can also hang ourselves with it. So I do think that there is a difference, clearly, but there's more of a Venn diagram overlap than I think perception would allow.
Okay. Makes sense. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
You have, if people are watching this, they see that you have Waymaker on. If not, then you verbally heard me say that. So you've developed two frameworks that I've become very familiar with and fascinated. The framework is a Strive methodology and the Waymaker philosophy. Can you tell me about a time when you were working with a team on one of those frameworks, or they're being interwoven, but the interpersonal drama was so toxic, was so, dehydrated, if you will, that it derailed everything? And how'd you handle it?
Oh, yes. Oh man, this is a fun one. So I flew out to a company to do a meet and greet with the leadership team. And in this instance, the owner and the CEO were there. And by the second hour, so there was two back-to-back meetings, we were 30 minutes in, and the manner in which just the level of disrespect, lack of allowing other team members to speak, putting words in people's mouths, everything that occurred, I was like, there's no methodology on God's green earth that's going to help this. There's no approach. We need a pivot now. And I actually injected myself and said, this room happened to just be gentlemen. And I said, gentlemen, are we opposed to calling this meeting now? And that really surprised everyone. But they said, nope. I said, okay, let's clear the room except for you and you, please. And everyone else left. And they were very confused.
Yeah.
And I told them, I said, if I need to fly back tonight, we can terminate this now. However, this is what I'm observing. And I personally will not continue to tolerate it. And I don't think it's the intent of what you want either. So what do we want to do from here? And that shot across the bow or wake up call, really, they both fell silent. And I was prepared for it to go any which way. And I delivered it with as much tact and candor as I could, but directness. And it was an invitation like, hey, let's fix this, but we are not going to continue playing how it's been. And, we talked for about 30 minutes, came to a point of clarity, and then continued on with the project. But the behavior changed and they didn't do that again. And that was an extreme pivotal moment that everyone remembered because it was a lot of yelling and no one else could speak. And then all of a sudden, there's a lot of biting lips and turning red, but they bit their lips and we were able to begin making some progress. So that was a very aggressive, acute scenario. But it happened.
I love that, and I know you've read this, in the Carrington story. That's chapter 2 for me when I start calling out and having the conversation from the financial and the CFO and, the reaction from the CEO, the long standing. So I'm there with you. I know exactly what you're talking about. You go from that almost that fog into, "We're not foggy here, we're cracked," into,
Yep.
and then it keeps going on. No, I love that. Alright, moving on. The next thing is also in your bio, you talk about high performers into purpose-driven leaders. And I love that. And I want you to unpack that. Tell me about a high performer. And it could be somebody who was on typically the high performers are on the technical side of the results, but the relationships, and you and I both know this is very common, the relationship side was beyond dehydrated, toxic. It was terrible. What transformation did you do, and what was the journey like for them?
So if you're not opposed, let's first talk about purpose just for a moment in this
Sure.
content. And the reason I want to do that is because I think a lot of people hear purpose driven and they think nonprofit, we're going to
Mm.
go and help build wells and do clean water. And that's the aperture is way too narrow. So let's just open up the aperture and then let's jump right into the specifics. So let's say you're in the financial industry. In the financial industry, you can help to create freedom for people, financial freedom. That is a purposeful desire in addition to just, increasing return on a portfolio. How do I help create financial freedom for my clientele, right? Or so that's one thing. In the trades, it's restoring safety and comfort to people's homes and businesses. If you're an electrician, plumber, those types of things. If you're in the military, it's safeguarding freedom, right? And individual liberties. So like when we talk about purpose, no matter what your industry, we can identify how we're creating something that drives intentional impact that goes beyond just turning another dollar, that imbues the work and inspires the team to come together to drive that initiative forward. So it's not just woo woo or clean water or things like that. It is quite literally tied to the soul of why an organization operates or can operate. And to the specific individual, like where we see that they're a high performer, but they're lacking the emotional intelligence and relational intelligence to thrive, it's the aperture, once again, is too narrow. And oftentimes there's a painful lack of self awareness or a misinterpretation of how they're being perceived.
Yeah.
And I prefer the second because it's easier to correct, but both are corrected with questions or both are presented the opportunity to begin to transform by very intentionally holding up a mirror through calibrated, open ended questions that allow them to self discover what the first step forward is and where that gap is. And one of the most beautiful things you can hear once you're going down that path is, I don't even know what to do with this, which is great because the
Yeah.
second we don't know, we can build a solution.
Yeah, because then the shells start to come off, the armor starts to shed. Yes.
Exactly. And the thing is, high performers often wear their performance as armor. So if you just go in with a blunt force weapon, good luck. Like they're just going to point to how effective they are. But if you can go in and especially if you can calibrate the questions so that it goes through their high performance to where there's the issue, that's where it's really a fun, in my mind, it's a fun game, but game played seriously because they can walk right into the issue after they've already substantiated where they're thriving, which completely removes the ability to point to that as a safeguard. And that's the type of conversations that just have to occur to begin to create that awareness and that willingness to move forward from it. Did I answer your question well?
It does. And actually, I'm thinking back at things that you've said and or that I've asked you. And so we actually have talked initially about the dehydration from a communication standpoint. And both of your books that I mentioned and all of mine get at the core of that as well. And certainly in the next one, Thirsty. Then we talked about the lack of trust and what that does to the foundation, and it causes all kinds of negative cracks. Talked about the financial impact, the ones that are obvious, the ones that are not obvious are all also often the most expensive, the ones that are not. I call out in the book the Roberts of the world who can tell you and show you everything, where all the cracks are, where all the hidden stuff is, right? And then we just moved into the emotional intelligence side coming out of the resiliency. And the emotional intelligence side, that interconnectivity, I always go from the brain to the mouth to the connection before we even get to the stress and the decision making. And you just described that connection of the interpersonal relationship, the empathy and the social responsibility driven by the purpose. And I just want to make sure the listeners are connecting everything that you just said along the way, because you're really connecting the dots that either what creates hydration or dehydration without us having to literally. So we just drew it out for you just in case for a recap. Fair enough, Jon? Is that you?
I think that's fair, and I'm bursting at the seams, if I may, on something to build on that.
Yeah, go for it.
So talking about the cracks, like in a vessel, like a cup that
Yeah.
causes you not to be able to hold water, right? Something clicked in my mind. So much of what we're discussing is a lack of integration. Because when you have a leader who, or any human, if they're not tending to themselves and caring for themselves, then they're pouring from a cup that's emptying, and it's going to run dry, and that dryness is going to reflect and echo out into their business and into their lives. The second, though, you integrate self-care, familial care, and interpersonal care into that, right? Then you begin to recharge yourself and replenish yourself such that you can pour from a cup that's overflowing. So any element of that is out of integration, that is not in harmony, is a crack in the vessel that causes that dehydration. So like one of the things that really shocks a lot of the folks I speak with is it is extremely common that in the first 60-minute conversation, I'll ask them, when's the last time they saw their spouse? Went on a date? What do they do with their children if they have them? What are they doing for their physical well-being, right? When are they taking time to reflect and heal mentally and spiritually, regardless of what their worldview is? And, I've been point blank asked, what does this have to do with business? And I said, well, by the time we're done talking, you'll see everything. But that integration that creates harmony, that allows the cup to fill up and be poured from in a place that's overflowing, which allows for that hydration. But short of that, you just see that Dust Bowl desert. So there's a visual metaphor to add on to what you just drew out. So now we're compounding on each other, but it's kind of fun.
I love it. I love it. And when you first started talking integration, I was thinking to, I guess, the baseline definition. But then I was like, okay, I know where you're going. And I absolutely love it. And it's true. I was in a conversation with the CEO last week, and he's bringing on a new member in the C-suite, and talked about two other team members that are just work. And he's really concerned because they're working, which is great, but he's really concerned. He's like, when I'm off, he's like, so, and our conversation was, how do I get those other two people who are incredible to understand that they cannot be work on all the time? And it goes straight to what you just said, because when you're work on all the time, it absolutely starts to crack all kinds of other things. I mean, you and I have both seen that in marriages and relationships with children over and over and over again. There's all kinds of memes about what do you want to be remembered for? And it's that you miss the meeting, or you miss the soccer tournament, and just all those pieces of who's actually going to remember you when you're gone, your kids or your work people, and who do you want to? And so I just love all that stuff. It's a necessity. It's a necessity. I opened up with this: visionaries and building movements, and not just businesses. Can you tell me about a founder that you really feel like his or her vision was absolutely brilliant? You thought they had this amazing, like, wow, that's cool, I love it, could be the purpose that you were talking about, and you thought that they were amazing, but then you found out either something on the inside or something on the outside was broke. I'm wondering if you have a story around that. I call it a vision execution gap.
I think you could almost classify what I've observed with dozens of leaders as visionary hallucinations, in which the vision is clean. It's beautiful. It's inspiring. It's empowering people. It's bettering their lives. It's all these things, but it's borrowing dopamine and the feeling of success from the vision, not the reality. And therefore it's like, well, we are a team that's doing this and we're a team that's doing this. And they're speaking to the future case and the vision, but there's a gap once again in awareness to the reality of the current state, in which that's where they're aiming, but not where they are. And that can show up in so many ways, especially in the self-care, the team care, the culture of trust and candid communication, turnover, just operational waste, everything. Because there's this hallucination of pride for we are a team that's fighting to do this. But in reality, we're a team that's subpar and mediocrity doing a shadow of that. And that can be painful, but it's an opportunity. It's an invitation to fix it. How's that though? That's like a
No,
classic.
no, I'm with you, and I'm thinking about the stagnation that you just described. And have a visual of a pond that's actually stagnant, and I think I might have actually talked about this as well, the stagnant pond syndrome. It's there, you can see the vision, but when you start to go down into it, the waters are mucky, and it's not what we thought it was, once we go down and around. And I feel like we maybe see that more often than not.
Yeah. And something that just clicked, I think is really worth sharing is it's also a defense mechanism. So I think this is really important because a lot of times, especially if you're in the leadership position, you're giving everything you have, maybe even foolishly and in a manner that's not sustainable, but you're doing the best you can. And the only thing that's nourishing you and allowing you the energy to keep going is clinging to that vision. And that's, I think, the positive side where this isn't just meant to be a baton to hit someone over the head. It's also an invitation to say, like, it's okay. The vision can be beautiful, but we also have to take the breath and step back and wherewithal to see if the pond is completely stagnant and turning into a swamp, or if our team is maybe giving us indication that we have gaps that are keeping us from living and realizing that very thing that we are clinging to. And it's a little scary to let go enough and step back enough to do that. But the return is that you're not clinging to a hallucination. You are beginning to live and embody an actualization of something real. And yeah, that can be a little bit of a seizure or a shudder, but I think it's critical, just a critical layer to what we're talking about.
This makes me think about just teams and teams alignment as a whole. So
Mhm.
talk about that lack of the communication or the trust, or the leader maybe is missing just overall EQI, or the whole team. Can you tell me about a client that you've helped fix the team alignment or the misalignment? Maybe tell the listener things that you normally ask or things that you're looking for, um, and kind of how you get started when or maybe the leader has simply said, I know we're not aligned. Noticed it.
I asked to look at their calendar.
Tell me more.
Yeah. So if someone tells me that they have a number one priority for their team, let's say we're going to have an all hands, we're going to set a new initiative. It's already been established. This is the number one priority. Okay, cool. They do the all hands, right? They have their offsite. Week, 2 weeks goes by and they're like, I feel like I'm just pushing this. By the way, I hate the word push. That's a different thing. And it's just, we're not having any traction. It's not happening. We need to fix this now. I'm like, okay, show me your calendar. And if I don't see the engaged portion of Strive, that cyclical, intentional, iterative opportunity where time is prioritized for that team to focus on continuing to move the needle forward and remove obstacles for that number one priority, then I can simply say it's not your priority, because your actions are not substantiating for you nor your team what the priority is. And instead, you're giving yourself an emotional opportunity to be angry as opposed to fix something. Let's set it on the calendar and let's do that. And let's see how this feels in 3 weeks and what the progress is. And typically it's that. So once again, brevity is the essence of wait. Yeah, something like that. But the idea is like the more simple, right? First principles thinking, things like that. The more simple and clean oftentimes the more effective. So it can be 30 minutes on the calendar every week where we verify it's still a priority, identify obstacles that need removed, and continue that forward motion. But let me see how you spend your time.
Oh my gosh, I love, love, love that. It reminds me of another recent conversation. Wasn't a conversation that I had. I know you know this, and I don't know if the people listening, but I help companies also create their internal universities. Throughout the year, I do quarterly, just like you would if you were in college, higher learning. You got midterms. Oh, I just did a midterm with this group. They are four sessions in. We've been focused on all the different elements of communication, feedback, healthy conflict, the behavioral hardware, and of course, predictive index. And so one of the questions, and there's two levels in this group. There's the management senior level, and then there's kind of some newbies to the people manager or high potentials, but both of them have overlapping content. The point I'm trying to make is one of the questions was how often should you be having conversations with your manager, or for the manager, your direct report, around feedback, check-in, priorities, clarity of expectations. And of course, I give them different ones, from the deliberate once a week check-in, the find them as you need them, as things pop up, kind of conversations all the time, monthly, quarterly. I am so sad to say that almost everyone out of about 35 students, split between those groups, Jon, most of the people got it wrong. It was more around the accidental or maybe monthly. And we had the direct conversation you just had around, no, this needs to be monthly. This needs to be weekly, and it needs to be a set agenda on both parties to confirm the human equation. All the expectations are clear on both sides, and all the information has been given and received on both sides. And are we truly on the same page? And that is my heart broke a little, to be honest. And so this week when I'm with them and I'm giving out, like a teacher, giving out the results, I'm going to make some jokes around how did I not transfer the fact that everything begins and ends with conversations, people, deliberate conversations, block of times on your calendar, because you only get in you only get out what you put in. So that was I know I just went all over the place with that, but complete agreement with what you just said. I had no idea you were going to say that, but that triggered.
Yes. Triggered.
Flurry of, all right. So 2 more questions for you. This one is people who either are watching right now or listening to you are going, oh my gosh, oh no, he's talking about me. That's my team that he's describing. What's one thing that you can say that they should do tomorrow when they walk into the office, or tomorrow when they go to their next staff meeting? What's one thing? They're like, oh my gosh, that was me. That is me.
I'd say don't wait till tomorrow. So I think that the very first thing I would do is let's just flip the script a little bit. If someone's if someone's engaging with us right now and the thought is, oh my gosh, this is me. Good. Like, congratulations. That realization is the first thing. Take a deep breath and celebrate the fact that you're allowing yourself an intentional moment of awareness to recognize a gap. So start there. That's the very first thing. And then the second thing is don't look for the solutions. Because once you have a realization, this goes to high performers, immediately it's going to be, how do I solve this? How do I fix this? And the only good thing about that is you're asking 2 questions, but your mind is geared to create the solutions, likely with bad data, and more than likely in a manner that's only going to perpetuate the problem. So the one thing I would recommend after you give yourself the gift of doing what many people just stuff to the side and ignore, in that breath and like that just moment of, okay, what am I going to do, is ask, what am I going to do? Where am I creating that which I don't want? How can I lead better? And that's the question. That would be the one thing. When you go into the office tomorrow and you're talking to your team, verbally say it or mentally say it 100 times before you speak anything. How can I lead better in this conversation? How can I lead better in this response? How can I do this? And even for one day, just reflecting on that is going to begin to open up the aperture, remove the blinders, and show a whole new spectrum of opportunity that before was just there but not visible. because your focus was elsewhere. So the one thing, because I gave kind of a few things uncleanly, would be relentlessly and consistently ask, how might I lead better? And allow that to change how you perceive and interact with your environment. And that will be a huge step that changes a lot.
I love every single word of that. To me, that's immediate hydration that you just gave. It's almost like that immediate offer of, I'm thirsty, you're thirsty. Here, let's get some water first, and start that hydration roadmap process, and then stopping and asking along the way. So for the breath that you think about, I'll change just because of all things thirsty. That glass of water that you're giving yourself and you're
Mhm.
offering to others to partake in. I love that. Wow, what a great way to bring us into a close for this. Jon, how can people find more information about everything that we talked about from you today, from your books to your methodology to your purpose, your process, your way maker way?
Yeah, I'd say there's two very simple approaches: LinkedIn and johnmayo.com. Just hold the H. So I'm one of those who spells John without the H. But either of those can help you get direct contact with me, and the conversation that changes everything can go from there.
I love it. I appreciate everything that you've given to myself in a conversation. I always feel like I'm in just a conversation with you, but to the listeners and the watchers today. And I hope that things are resonating with them in a different way and in a way that they can see it. So
Hmm.
they're just visualizing it, but they're seeing that path forward. And so we appreciate you, all of your guidance and tips today for that. So I thank you. I thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to dance together. It's super fun.
Oh, absolutely. Always good. And you and I could both go on for days, so we may have to do another one of these as well.
Yeah, that's
Well, thank everybody who is here, either listening or watching or sharing this information that Jon and I brought to you today. It really is meant to be a deeper dive into. Hopefully, by now everybody knows I call that either cultural hydration or dehydration. I truly, truly, truly believe that the world and our relationships are thirsty and that we are dehydrated, and that's what's drawn me into doing this book and doing it in the three different ways for that. So there's a couple of ways if you want more around the thirsty book. One is the links are in the postings and below as well, but you can join the pre-launch and to get some good freebies, certainly some things around trust, like Jon and I have been talking about today as well. And they're actually conversations and tips, so you can pick it up and do something about it. And I'm also starting to offer a VIP for the book launch itself, and you can grab some goodies on there as well. So again, the links are there. So again, Jon, thank you so much for sharing your experience and really demonstrating you're living these principles already. And so thank you for sharing these principles, and you truly can transform an organization, and you can do it at any level. It's about, if you choose to, in the world to show up. So remember, cultural dehydration, it is expensive, but it is repairable, one glass at a time. All right. Cheers. Exactly. Jon, if you had 60 seconds with a room full of CEOs and business leaders to convince them that investing in relationships and communication isn't a touchy-feely nonsense, but business critical strategy, what would you say?
I think I'd invite them to answer a question. And the question's pretty simple. All right, guys, out of everyone here, who here only works with robots and artificial intelligence? And if any hands go up, I'll be super surprised. But
Word.
yeah, okay, so no hands. So everyone here works with human beings. Who here works with human beings? Other humans. Everyone's hand should go up, right? Unless they just don't want to raise their hand. At which point I'd say, okay, then unless you have perfect growth, perfect job satisfaction and retention, and perfect profitability, we've just scratched the very tip of the iceberg. And this deserves further thought that I encourage and invite you to chew on.
I love that, because you can't get away from the human element. We're never going to get away from the human element, ever. I can't imagine any scenario where we get away from the human element.
Yep, not as long as humans are alive. This is going to be a core and pivotal factor of how we interact with one another And it is a science and an art that deserves intentional cultivation. And the moment that that is realized, everything can begin to change. And it's even why I encourage folks to look at leadership as its own profession, not as a tack on that you just take by rising the ladder, because it is not a tack on. It is something that is the first principle, the cornerstone of how you operate. And that is because you are leading yourself as a human who's interacting with other humans. And that is infinitely messy and requires extraordinary intentionality.
Love it. Boom. I have no more to add, sir. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. Great food for thought. And once again, I appreciate your expertise.